See my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay.
So, in light of some of the more recent presentations that we've done, I was able to tie into a few things from our last couple of presentations tonight. But basically, we're talking about Ensisheim, who's it's a real famous meteorite. Some call it the King of Meteorites. That fell in France many years ago. So let's go ahead and get started. So 1492 was a big year for explorers. As you know, that was the year that Christopher Columbus, quote unquote, discovered the New World. Even though, humans had been living here for a long time before he and his two other ships arrived. But that same year, in fact, just a couple of weeks later, in November of that year, on the other side of the pond, something really exciting happened. Another foreign explorer burst onto the scene, but this one was an extraterrestrial visitor, not ET, but a space rock that had been traveling in space from the asteroid belt for quite some time. So, oops, I'll go back. So, a little bit before noon on November 7th of 1492, there was a fireball that was seen and heard from about 150 kilometers away from where it finally landed, which was in a wheat field just south of the town of Ensisheim, which at that point in time was still in Alsace, like it is now, but it was in a country called Further Austria, which is now part of France. But the fireball was accompanied by a loud sonic boom, and the stone created about a 3-foot deep crater when it landed. The only eyewitness to the actual impact was a young farm boy who was working in a nearby field. But as soon as all the residents, it was a walled city, so as soon as everybody could get outside, and some of the villages around the city, they all got together and they raised the meteorite out of the hole, and immediately started knocking off pieces of the meteorite as lucky tokens, I guess. Thankfully, a local magistrate, who I'm sure was doing it for all the right purposes, interfered with the destruction of the stone, and he wanted to preserve it for his king, King Maximilian, who, by the way, was on his way towards Ensisheim with his army. He'd be arriving in a couple of weeks. So, and he happened to be the son of the reigning emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Frederick III. So this guy thought it would probably be a pretty good idea to hang around and share that stone with the king. So he had to move it to the Ensisheim church, where it would be safe, and from there, that's when the fame of that stone became really magnified. Today, there's a little monument with a plaque marking the spot where the meteorite landed. There's no crater or anything like that. Like I said, it's farm field, and it's still surrounded by farm fields, but it's just south of town. So anyway, I was telling you about King Maximilian. Later that month, on the 26th of November, King Maximilian, who liked to call himself the King of the Romans. He arrived in Ensisheim with his army, learned about the meteorite, and decided to have a private consultation with the meteorite, which took a couple of days. And when he finished his consult, the king declared that the stone was a wonder of God, and then immediately thereafter chipped two big pieces off of the wonder of God, one for himself and one for his buddy, the Archduke Sigismund of Austria. And then he told the people of Ensisheim, his loyal subjects, to keep the stone in the church as a sign of God's miracles. So, as you can imagine, the meteorite caused quite a stir, particularly after having its private consultation with the king. And while news did not spread quite as fast back then as it does today, it still spread. And these are just some examples of some of the artwork and some of the stories that went along with this fall that were distributed around the area of Ensisheim for some time to come after that. And other people got into the act too. The famous German painter Albrecht Dürer got into the act. The woodcut on the left was actually a piece of art that he did for one of those quote unquote news stories. But the most interesting piece is the piece on the right. The small picture at the top was his original painting called St. Jerome in the Wilderness. And it was in a gallery in Great Britain for the longest time before anybody realized that on the back side of the canvas, Dürer had painted a picture of the bolide of the actual meteorite as it was falling. So that's kind of interesting, sort of a lost piece of artwork there. A piece of the meteorite was sent to Cardinal Piccolomini, who later would become Pope Pius III, by none other than the Archduke that King Maximilian had given a piece of the meteorite to. So it went from the Archduke to the future Pope. And along with it was some related verses from a famous poet and satirist of the time, Sebastian Brandt. This particular one there, he had several different poems he wrote about Donnerstein von Ensisheim. This one, he had the one that went with the piece of the meteorite to the future Pope was called Loose Leaves Concerning the Fall of the Meteorite. But he predicted the meteorite was a portent of victory, and he admonished King Maximilian to declare war on France immediately. And after that battle, when Maximilian ultimately won, the fame of the stone grew even more, which is, usually the portents from the heavens, comets, hairy stars, whatever they call them, were generally seen as portents of doom and misfortune, and things like that, whereas he was building this up as a portent of a victory. Of course, once the luck ran out, then all of a sudden it became a portent of doom and misery, like most other heavenly things that people didn't understand. Um, so remember I said, Maximilian had ordered the stone be kept at the Ensisheim church. This is actually the modern version of the church, but thanks to his loyal followers, it was kept at the church for 300 years. It survived the 30 Years' War. Um, they really had it secured in there. They used something that was described as akin to crampons to attach the stone to the stonework of the church, because number one, they didn't want anyone to steal it, and number two, they were worried that the stone was going to get up and leave the same way that it had come to them, that it would just take off and fly up into the sky again. So they wanted to make sure that it wasn't going anywhere, and it wasn't. And it even survived the Age of Enlightenment, when philosophers were, working real hard to try and rid society of some of the superstitions and fears of the previous times. But some of these philosophers came up with several not very enlightened theories of, what the meteorite really was, since it couldn't possibly have fallen from the heavens. Um, one that was a popular theory for meteorites in Europe at the time was that it was just a stone that was heaved up into the atmosphere from a distant volcano and just took its time finding a place where it could land. Um, but another one, um, in this particular case, this gentleman decided that the stone had simply rolled down one of the mountains, and at the time that the young boy had seen it impact, really all that was the stone being struck by lightning at the same time. So it was just a terrestrial stone that had been struck by lightning as it was rolling down a hill. Um, all sorts of fun things like that. When in fact, it really was sort of the first meteorite that most people actually thought came from the sky, not something terrestrial. And it stayed, that the meteorite stayed in this church until 1793 during the French Revolution, when revolutionaries took the stone from the church and took it down the road to a museum in the town of Colmar, which isn't too far from Ensisheim. But eventually, in 1803, the meteorite was returned to the Ensisheim church, where it eventually outlasted the original church structure itself. And when the church needed to be rebuilt, this is the modern church that replaced it, then the stone was moved to the museum in Ensisheim, where it resides yet today, in the Museum of the Regency in the town of Ensisheim, which unfortunately I think is still closed due to COVID. So I wouldn't plan any immediate trips there to go see the meteorite. But you notice the right hand picture. This is the only meteorite in the world that I'm aware of that has its own brotherhood, called the Brotherhood of St. George of the Guardians of the Meteorite of Ensisheim. Has its own brotherhood protecting the meteorite so that nothing happens to it. So, I titled the thing, the Ensisheim, the King of Meteorites. Why King? Well, lots of reasons. It's the oldest European meteorite fall for which there is still preserved material, so that research can still be done on the meteorite. There's only one other meteorite fall, which is older, and it's from China. That meteorite was just recently discovered in a temple, but the records at the temple said that it had fallen in 90 AD, so it predated this one by a bunch. But there is not enough material left of that meteorite to do anything appreciable with it. This particular meteorite has over 500 years intertwining our past history on Earth. And trust me, there's books about this meteorite and papers, talking about the intertwining of politics and romance and wars and religion and everything else that centered around this meteorite. But it also pulls together some of our evolution in the solar system, which is kind of neat. It was believed to have fallen from the heavens 300 years before the origin of meteorites actually gained wide acceptance around the world. So 300 years before people realized meteorites fell from the sky, they believed this meteorite fell from the sky. And like I said, it was, unlike a lot of other celestial events, it was considered a sign of good luck until the luck ran out, and then it was just like all the rest of them. This is the oldest meteorite in the world with a known date of fall. There are some older meteorites or fossil meteorites that they found, in layers of ancient rock. But this is the oldest one where we actually know what date the meteorite fell on. And this is the single largest meteorite that's ever fallen in Europe, the single largest stone. It was originally 127 kilograms. With all the, pieces that have been taken off since, it's down to 54 kilograms now. But it still was the largest individual stone ever to have fallen in Europe. And it's the only meteorite to ever have a consult with a king, a top to top, so to speak. And it was the meteorite that discovered Earth in 1492. The first actual kind of chemical analysis that was done on Ensisheim was done by a French chemist, Fourcroy, in 1803. And he found, not surprisingly, that the meteorite was mostly silica, as he called it, 56%, iron oxide, 30%, nickel oxide, 2.5%, a little bit of sulfur, which was probably, again, more iron sulfide than it was just straight up sulfur. But interestingly enough, Fourcroy, and this is completely unrelated to his research on the Ensisheim meteorite, he was the co-discoverer of the element iridium. And iridium is found in much higher concentrations in meteorites than it is on any rocks on the Earth's crust. And it's one of the indicators that a meteoritic stone is extraterrestrial in nature. So it's kind of interesting, two separate areas where he was involved end up tying together in the end. You can look up in the Meteoritical Bulletin, or the Met Bull for short. You can look up, there's probably 60,000 meteorites in here. But you can look them up by name. Ensisheim is in here. You can see it fell in 1942. There's more underneath this, but the interesting thing that I wanted to point out here is the classification. It's considered a ordinary chondrite, LL6, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But just a super quick uh, meteorite 101. um, Almost all meteorites that we know of are stony meteorites. Um, about 94, 95, 94%. A little over a percent are stony irons, and about 5% are iron meteorites. So the ones that we always see the fancy big pictures of, or we go to, the Smithsonian and you see these giant, iron meteorites with these big thumbprints in them and everything. Those are a very small percentage of the actual meteorites that we know of. Most of them are stony meteorites, of which Ensisheim is one. We'll talk a little bit about its LL6. So LL stands for low iron, low metal. And we talked about the iron oxide and iron sulfide. Um, you can have a pretty fair amount of iron. This is actually closer to about 20% total iron, but there's only about 1 to 3% in LL6 meteorites that's actually metallic iron. Most of it is oxides or sulfides, where the iron is in a compound with something other than itself. So that's what the LL stands for: low iron, low metal. And then the petrologic type is 6, which means um, this this meteorite was, or LL6 meteorites in general, have been thermally metamorphosed. They've gone through some sort of a heating that was high enough temperature that the constituents within the stone have metamorphosed so that they're homogeneous. In other words, chondrites have chondrules in them, um, uh, little round balls of material that are some of the original constituents of our solar system. But because of the heating, this type 6, it's really difficult to see those individual chondrules um, because they've gone through this metamorphosis. Now, LL6, even though only about 8% of all the ordinary chondrites are LL6, it's still a pretty decent sized number, and there's been a couple of famous ones. Most recently, the Chelyabinsk, which we talked about a couple of times in previous meetings. The big fall in Russia in 2013 um, was an LL6 meteorite. Um, there's a picture of the bolide, which is just a frame capture from a video. But there's a helicopter shot of the main mass, where the main mass hit the frozen lake, and then it was later pulled up. Divers went down and attached it to some ropes and pulled it up. And here's a picture of it on the ground. And then this one that I tried to show everybody last month, I think, or the month before, but I couldn't get the camera to focus. There's a picture of my little uh, 15 gram Chelyabinsk with a corner broken off that I've got in my collection. And we talked a little bit about Hayabusa last month with Umberto. in its mission to the asteroid Itokawa. It was a sample return mission, and what they found is that the surface composition of Itokawa is most similar to the composition of LL6 chondrites. That doesn't necessarily mean that LL6 chondrites came from this asteroid, but asteroids of this class may be the parent bodies for LL6 and LL5 chondrites. And it's not that many types of asteroids where we actually have a clue of what the parent body, or that many meteorites where we have a clue where what the parent body for those meteorites are in the asteroid belt. So that's, as we explore more asteroids, I'm sure we'll find out more about that as well. And then just because you know, the town of Ensisheim and the Ensisheim meteorite are almost spiritually revered by meteorite collectors, and as a result, the largest meteorite show in Europe is held every year, except this past year and this year, in Ensisheim. It's an Ensisheim show, and this is a picture of one of the rooms. There are 6 or 7 rooms in this building where, unlike some of the rock shows that we have, rock and mineral shows we have here in the States, where there might be a few tables with meteorites and a lot of tables with rocks and minerals, this is a meteorite show. And so there's 6 big rooms like this with dealers from all over the world selling their wares. Big meteorite show. And as you can see, they do a coin every year for each show. This was the last show that they did in 2019, which happened to be the 20th anniversary of the Ensisheim show. So some people collect those coins as well. And then, sort of to wrap it up, this is soon to be my small piece of meteorite history. As we speak tonight, this little fragment of Ensisheim is on its way to me from Poland, from a collector in Poland. So hopefully I'll have that in a couple of weeks, and I can add it to my collection. And that's really all I had for my presentations. If anybody has any questions or anything, I'll do my best. I'll stop sharing here. Bill?
Historians report that Thomas Jefferson in the early 1800s did not believe that meteorites fell to Earth from the universe.
A lot of people didn't believe that. They just didn't. They couldn't understand how that could possibly be. But it was funny, and one of the slide that I said "Why King," I had a little clip up there and a picture up there in the corner. Jules Verne actually wrote one of his adventure books, something like the Journey to the Golden, or Chasing the Golden Comet, that was basically about the Ensisheim meteorite.
Oh.
So it's pretty famous as meteorites go.
Wasn't excuse me. Wasn't the Thomas Jefferson quotation something like, I would find it easier to believe that two Harvard professors would lie than rocks could fall from heaven.
That
Something
sounds
like that.
about right.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
No, there were there were trusted scientists that just absolutely refused to believe that was a. They just thought that the concept of rocks falling from the sky randomly was just ludicrous. There had to be an explanation.
On something a little bit off topic, Rick, the astronomy magazines for April are reminding us that near the equinoxes, there are opportunities to see Jovian satellites eclipse or occult each other. And they give a couple of dates, and they refer you to the internet for some other dates. So that might be an opportunity. Occultations and eclipses of Jovian satellites
Hmm.
by other Jovian satellites.
That would be fun. To look at. I wonder if my little Sky and Telescope apps on my iPad, the moons of Jupiter and the moons of Saturn, show those eclipses and occultations.
Hmm. Of course, you know, Jupiter's out in the wee hours, so you're looking at pre-dawn work.
All right. I'm getting older, Bill. I get up earlier every year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, those mutual eclipses and occultations happen every 6 years since it's a 12-year orbital period for Jupiter. I happen to be at the so-called Air Force 24-inch telescope at the summit of Mauna Kea and observing one of those events photometrically. And I had a difficult time actually taking the data because it was so much fun just looking through the eyepiece of the telescope. Uh, we had like a flip mirror to put into the beam to center the object in the aperture of the photometer. The reason why I wanted to keep looking at it is because the seeing was superb on that particular occasion. I could actually see the disk of the shadow moving across the disk of the satellite. I don't remember what pair it was. I think it might have been Io's shadow on Ganymede. So the object that the shadow was being cast on was larger than the object casting the shadow. Um, so, yeah, it was resolvable. You could see the disc. It was just incredible. One of those nights, really rare, super good seeing.
So you were at 14,000 feet or so for that?
13,700 and I don't know, 50, 60, something like that. I mean, the summit is 13,796. And I know that the 88-inch telescope is, like on the third story of the dome. And so it's actually a little bit higher than the summit. But the old Air Force 24-inch was down from the summit by, I don't know, 10, 20 feet or so. So a little under 13,796. I could look it up.
Some of you may have heard Rick and I talking about the a scope that I acquired this weekend. Anybody want to see a picture of it?
Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
Let's see. Let me share my screen. If Rick will allow me.
You should be able to now.
Okay. There we go. It's a short focal length reflector. What It originally probably had an 8 or 9-inch mirror in it. As I acquired it from the local lady, it has a 10-inch mirror in it, which is going to need to be probably reground, polished, and refigured, because the secondary mirror in the past broke free from the holder and hit the primary.
Oh,
It was a very thin mirror. The secondary was only about 1/8 of an inch thick. So it was a pretty lightweight secondary, maybe about 1.5 inches long, maybe 1 inch wide. So there are some scratches on the mirror caused by the impact to the coating, but I'm not sure if they actually go down into the glass of the primary. When I send it off to be recoated, I'm going to send it to Nova Optical. They will be able to regrind, polish, and refigure it if it's too badly damaged. But what I love about it is, you see the rectangular contraption for the focuser?
yeah.
This could be replaced with a plate camera. They could put a plate camera in place. And they could also have it also came with a prime focus plate camera, which replaced the secondary. The end rings on both ends are brass. We have you can see the brass finder scope.
That's an amazing scope.
The tube is really thick. It's a real heavy steel tube. And it's got a reinforced steel part here for where it would attach to the mount. And then you can see down near the bottom, below the white ring, there's a little brass nub on the side of the tube. There's another one behind the finder, which I think may have been for some weights to balance the tube. Then
David, what type of mount are you going to put that on?
Well, I'm thinking about just trying to turn it into a Dobsonian, make a bracket to go around on either side of the white ring to mount it put it on a Dobsonian mount in a way so that I can, retrofit it, take the changes I will make will be all reversible. So if somebody wants to return it to its original state, they can return it to the original state. So I have no intention of permanently modifying the tube.
What date would you put on that scope?
Late 20s, early 30s.
It's pretty amazing.
The mount that it came with, or that it was with, there was another telescope tube of identical construction, but about 8 feet long, which the lady who I acquired this from, who Rick directed me to, still has the mount that it was on. The mount probably weighs 300-400 pounds.
Ooh.
It's a very large German equatorial. The gears are well over 1 foot in diameter and 1 inch thick bronze.
David, was this a homemade scope?
That's a number of us have been debating that on the Cloudy Nights forum. Most people think it was commercially made by probably a specialized machine shop where somebody contracted to build it. A lot of that happened. There were a lot of small machine shops around the country that, gone out of business over the years, but they don't know. Most people think that have looked at the pictures. Most people don't think it was an amateur that made it. They think it was commercially made.
What about the finder? Have you looked through the finder?
The finder is real dirty. I'm going to have to take the finder apart. I've got the finder for the other longer telescope. We've got a guy coming who will be coming from Pennsylvania in the summer to take the rest of the longer optical tube assembly and the huge German equatorial mount back home to Pennsylvania with him this summer. I told folks on cloudy nights that, well, if nobody wants this scope, she's going to turn it into scrap. It's going to go to the scrap yard. So it looks like we've got somebody to take the mount and the other tube assembly. Let's see. Here's a picture of the front end of the tube. You can see the paint peeling. It's full of cobwebs. You can see where the secondary attached to the spider there. And a close-up of the focuser. I love that focuser. It's kind of a unique design, and it actually works. I'm going to have to manufacture some replacement thumb screws to finish attaching that bracket.
Mhm.
But when I later this spring, I'm going to get the power washer out, and I'm going to power wash off all the old paint inside and out after I remove the brass fittings.
It looks like it has an eyepiece in it. Is that true?
Yes, it does.
So in that box with all the accessories, David, it looked like in one corner of the box there was a box that maybe had several eyepieces in it.
Yes,
Is that
there
what
are
those were?
6 eyepieces,
Yeah.
including there are 6 eyepieces. This eyepiece in this picture makes 7.
Were they the
all brass.
standard, were they the standard 1 1/4 or 2
Yes.
inch?
They're 1 1/4 inch eyepieces.
Are they Ramsdens?
I'm not sure. I haven't tried taking them apart to look at them.
Yeah, or
They're all
Kellner or
cleaned
something.
up. They're probably
Maybe Ortho.
Kellners or Ramsdens.
Yeah.
You know, whatever was popular back in the day. I'm sure they're typical, either Ramsdens or Kellners.
Yeah, that was a pretty scope.
Simpler than that, they may be the well, what was even before the Kellners and Ramsdens?
Huygens.
The Huygens. They're probably Huygens.
Yeah, the Huygens. They were selling scopes with Huygens in the early 60s.
These are from the probably 30s or 40s, 20s. I'm going to guess 20s, 30s, or 40s.
Did the lady say who was using the scope or any history of it?
She said, Rick, correct me, she said that their neighbor whom they acquired it from was a retired faculty member from the University of Nebraska.
Yeah, and he actually had, so there was a building that the larger scope was in their backyard, that's sort of sunken down into the ground, but it was a circular dome, looked like a silo, really. It was maybe, what do you think, Dave, 6-8 feet wide?
About 8 feet wide.
Yeah, and it was on 4 wheels. And so they had the large telescope was mounted on the concrete pad, and then they would just open the doors and roll the silo away from the telescope to observe, and then pull it back over around the telescope and shut it up when they were done. But yeah, did she show you the new section of fence right behind there?
No, she didn't.
So it was the neighbor literally right behind their house, across the fence from their backyard, who had the telescope originally, and they couldn't figure out, because it weighed so much, how they were going to move it around into their backyard. So they just took 2 sections of their privacy fence down and laid the wood down on the ground and rolled it the best they could on the wood, and then just replaced the 2 sections of fence.
And she said she told me it took about 3 or 4 people to move the telescope mount to their yard.
Yeah, well, I can believe it. That was, I have no idea how much that weighs, but it's more than a 1-person job. I can
I'm guessing 300 to 400 pounds
Yeah.
just by the mound itself without the tube.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm glad we found a home for it, rather
yeah.
someplace other than the scrapyard.
Let me show you. I was mentioning to Rick a recent acquisition to my library. Come on. A little bit slow here. Where's my posting? Kind of my posting is disappearing behind other postings. Where did it go? It was here in the. Oh, just went past it. There we go. History of the Sky, of the Heavens. Printed in 1757. The monogram on this book is Charles Messier's monogram. And in the front cover of each volume is his bookplate. And this bookplate basically reads, astronomer to the Royal Navy and member of the Academy of Sciences, 1782. And that's his monogram. And I believe the crown is indicating that he's a member of the Royal Society of France, the French Royal Society, Science Society. Later monograms after the Revolution lacked the crown and the motto below it. It just shows his initials, stylized initials. He being a member of the Royal Society he was lucky to keep his head. Many of his fellow Royal Society members lost their heads in the Revolution.
Mm.
But I thought this was kind of an interesting acquisition, finding something that actually belonged to Charles Messier.
Yep, it's pretty neat.
It's very cool.
And the frontispiece and the title page. There we go.
Well, that should fit right into your collection.
Oh yeah. It fits in real nice. I joined this group, Vintage Astronomy Books. I joined it about December, and it consists of a lot of people who are serious astronomy book collectors, and it also consists of a number of people who are current and former museum curators. So when I've got something that I'm not too sure about, these folks have really been helping me out and identifying what I have.